started here this morning. First of all, we're certainly always very thankful for Beef and the Beef Endowment for their sponsorship of all of our educational seminars, and appreciate their help and everything that they do on behalf of the breed. And they do this on an annual basis for us, and we're very thankful for their support. This morning we're going to have Dr. Joe Paschal speaking with us on the importance of carcass quality and kind of how we're going to collect and how we collect some of that carcass data. Dr. Paschal is the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Livestock Specialist. He's stationed at the AgriLife Research and Extension Center in Corpus Christi, Texas, and serving 37 different counties along the Gulf Coast and South Texas. Dr. Paschal is a member of the Animal Breeding and Genetics section in the Department of Animal Science and the graduate facility at Texas A&M University. He's also an external professor at Texas A&M University, Kingsville, and he earned his bachelor's, master's, and doctorate in animal breeding from Texas A&M University. Dr. Paschal currently assists county agents in conducting, developing, and evaluating educational and applied research activities in animal breeding and genetics, reproduction, nutrition, management, and marketing. His interests include applied beef cattle breeding and genetics, including applications of genomics, tropical and subtropical cattle production systems, growth and development, and improving carcass quality. In addition to all of his programming responsibilities, Dr. Paschal works closely with many different breed organizations and different bull and female development programs. Currently is in charge of collecting the carcass data for ABBA, the American Brahman Breeders Association, for their Carcass Merit Program. Help us welcome Dr. Joe Paschal.
I didn't realize he was going to read that whole thing. The thing that I am most pleased about is the fact that I get to work with producers like you and county extension agents. All the rest of that stuff pales in comparison to that. And so I'm very pleased to have been invited to come here today. I know I'm supposed to talk about carcass data and carcass data collection and the importance, but I want to start out, as I did at Mr. Carr's the other day, and as I have at a couple of others. Well, I need to go forward, right? Anybody seen the Idex pregnancy test, the new one that's come out? I'm going to pass this around. It's already packaged. I don't own stock in the company. I'm not a salesperson, but I just sort of wanted y'all to be aware that it's out there. And so what this is a very rapid shoot-side pregnancy test. So you take a little bit of blood, about 1 cc of blood from the tail or from the neck, from the jugular vein. You put it in a purple top tube, not a red top tube. And then you buy this package. Now, most of the animal health companies are selling this. I don't think you can buy it at the local feed store yet or at TSC. But if you go online and you type in Idex alerties, okay, pregnancy test, several animal health companies have it. It's going to be sold in a box, like you see right here, of 25. I've been telling people 30 because that's what they originally told me. But it'll be a box of 25 packets, just like this that you see in that bag. And generally for around $190 to $199 for 25 packets. So that's about $4 a piece. Okay? And what you do is you take that 2 cc or that cc of blood in that purple top tube, and then you open up this package, and there's 2 things in there. One is a flat plastic testing apparatus, and the other is a plastic tube that looks like an eyedropper that has solution in it. And so after you mix that 1 cc of blood in that purple top tube, you take out about 6 or 8 drops. You fill the little well in that eyedropper, and then you mix it a little bit. Just move it back and forth. And what you're going to do is you're going to put it in this well right here, about 6 drops. And then just lay that flat on surface and go do the next one. Or you can collect 10 or 15 cows and do them all at once, whatever you want to do. And in about 5 to 7 minutes, one of 2 things is going to happen. So after you drop this blood in, within about 5 to 7 minutes across this filter paper, you're either going to have one solid line here at the C line that stands for control. You know, scientists develop this, right? So that means that she's open. Okay, if, as you see in the top one, number 32, and by the way, I did these were done back in August during beef cattle short course, so they're 3 months old, so they're starting to look a little warm. But if you see at the very top, you see 2 faint lines, right? She's pregnant. And the beauty of this is that we actually have 2 blood tests right now. We have BioPrint or BioPrint Check. That's a really good program. I use it and have been using it for about 17 years. In that particular program, you take 2 cc's of blood, put it in a red top tube, send it off, and generally in about 4 days you get an email back that tells you whether or not they're open or bred. Nothing wrong with that program. That's about $2.50 for the test. Okay, this is going to be about, we said probably close to $4. You won't have to wait 4 days. You have to wait like 5 minutes. All right, but it can be used at about 27 days, which is about the same as the other test. It's a simple yes or no test. It does look for something different than the BioPrint. So the BioPrint test looks for placental forming hormones. So which means that if the cow has a placenta, she has those hormones circulating in her bloodstream. So in a heifer, it's 100% accurate test. The BioPrint test is the red top tube test, because the only way she's going to be bred, right? The only way she's going to have a placenta is to be bred. But in cows, it's not quite as accurate, because the cow could have calved 60 days ago and got rebred on her first heat and still has some placental-forming hormones circulating in her bloodstream. Chances are she won't give a positive pregnancy, but she might cause you to have a retest. Like they might suggest you that you retest that. So that's the reason why it's not 100%. This uses PAGs, which are pregnancy-associated glycoproteins. I know that's a big word, but a glycoprotein is just a protein that's encapsulated with fat. And it's a protective device that's associated with pregnancy. And so, whether it's a cow that just calved 60 days ago and got rebred on her first heat or her first calf heifer, at about 28 days, you have equal accuracy. Almost 99%, well, 100% for heifers, 99% for cows. So I just threw that out there in case y'all are interested. I'm not trying to take business away from your veterinarian. Some of you got really good vets. Some of you, your veterinarian's 100 miles away. And so if you need to have some information on a heifer or a bull, or a cow, or maybe a cold cow that you're going to sell, this is a good way to get that animal tested. Relatively easy at low cost. Okay? So I'm not trying to take business away from your regular pregnancy person, but this is, and then again, once again, it's just a yes/no test. So it won't tell you anything else. It won't tell you if it has to be a mummified fetus or if she has pyometry or those kinds of things, and it won't tell you how old that calf is. And if you have somebody ultrasound in your cow, it won't tell you if they have twins in there or if it's a male or a female. But nonetheless, for $4, it's a pretty good test.
Do you use the same syringe on different cows?
Yeah, good question. Thank you very much. Let's not, right? Let's use a different syringe on every animal. I knew there was something I was going to forget. And so you can buy purple top syringes. They're going to cost you, depending on who you buy them from, anywhere from 15 cents to 20 cents each. Or you might be able to get your veterinarian to give them to you. And of course, everybody knows what syringes are worth. I use a 3 cc syringe with an 18 gauge needle to draw blood. And I can buy those for about, the needles and the syringes for about 25 cents. So there's a little extra cost involved with it. Okay? Don't throw these in the dashboard of your pickup truck like everything else. It does have an expiration date and they do need to be treated, well, with a little bit of care. All right? And so I'm passing that around, and y'all feel free to look at it. All right, so now I'm going to get on to the topic that I was asked to visit, that was Colin asked me to visit with you about. And we collect a lot of carcasses. It really started, when I say we, I mean myself and my graduate students. And folks at A&M, and I work a lot with a meat science professor down at A&M named Dr. Tanner Machado. And so this actually started back in 1990, 1991 when we started the Ranch to Rail program. And we fed cattle either at King Ranch or at Freona Feed Yards. People consigned 5 head of cattle. And that's sort of where it started. That program wound down in 2004 because calf prices started getting high and people decided, well, instead of waiting for 6 or 7 months for my money, I'll just take the auction barn and get it now. But we continue to do it because a lot of other folks that had participated in the program wanted to feed cattle and they wanted carcass data, and a lot of that carcass data went back to their breed associations, either for their within herd information, or EBDs, or for EPDs in the breed-wide association studies, okay? And so we've done a lot of that, thousands, maybe tens of thousands by this time. Some beef masters, some Cimbrogs, some Santa Gertrudis, a lot of Brahman, a lot of other breeds. And even the Wagyu people occasionally want to have carcass data. Okay? And so, you know, cattle are being marketed on the basis of carcass merit. So I live in Corpus, I work in Corpus. We have a beef processing plant down there, a long time beef processing plant that's changed hands about 3 times, and now it's owned by a fellow by the name of Mr. Helsenfeld, and it's called STXB. And they're basically moving towards about a 65% choice product because that's what they're trying to market. And so as a result, they sort of put some limits on the types of cattle that they're going to accept. So at one time, that plant would do about 1,200 to 1,400 head of cattle a day. They would work 5 to 5.5 days a week. And they would draw cattle from an area, if you're not from Texas, kind of give you an idea, from Austin and south. Maybe they would go to San Angelo, but essentially Austin and south. And so, you know, after the gyrations and now the new plant, and now they're sort of interested in the higher percent choice, they're bringing a lot of cattle even from the panhandle in order to meet that. And they're getting pretty close. They're running in the mid-60s in terms of their percent choice, but a lot of that's because of cattle that they're bringing from the panhandle that are black hiders. They're not totally black cattle because there probably are some dairy beef cattle, but there's a lot of those black cattle. So they have 13 pins in the morning, cattle that come in and they're almost solid black. And so they're sort of using that to sort of leverage whatever cattle they bring from local feed yards. And so they're not interested in high percentage Brahman cattle. So I do a lot of carcass work with the Brahman Association. Sometimes successfully, sometimes not very successfully, since we're all among friends here. But they really don't want to have any gray cattle. They really don't want to have any Mexican roping steers. They don't want to have any straight dairy cattle. They will take your cattle. Okay? That's not a problem. They'll take Gurkha. That's not a problem. They'll take Cimbrock cattle. That's not a problem. So the other eared breeds are fine. Red Brangus, and of course they like regular Brangus. But so, you know, the whole emphasis is towards this quality. So we talk about genetic selection. Y'all have EPDs for carcass traits. Y'all have a good index for carcass, for selecting for carcass traits. Y'all use ultrasound, and I'm a fan of ultrasound. Dr. Tommy Perkins and I have known each other since about 1986, and I sort of watched ultrasound develop. But I can tell you that the last time that we scanned a bunch of Brahman cattle, the ultrasound results did not jive with the actual carcass data. And so we're going to have to make sure that what we actually are scanning is what we're actually seeing on the rail. And we'll talk more about that. But I like the use of ultrasound because I don't have to kill the animal, and I have a pretty reasonable idea of where that animal is relative to carcass traits. And when I say carcass traits, the two that I'm really interested in, actually the one I'm really interested in, is percent intramuscular fat, okay, which we call marker. They're really two different traits. Okay? They're really two different traits. It's like saying selecting a calf for birth weight, trying to improve weaning weight. You'll get some improvement in weaning weight, but not as much improvement as if you had selected directly on weaning weight. Does that make sense? So ultrasound, intramuscular fat, and carcass marbling score are measures of the same thing, but they are not perfect measures of each other. Okay? All right. And so, but my little caveat down there is because y'all are not a carcass breed. And y'all were designed for something else. Y'all remember the 6 essential traits, the balances, you know? And I remember Mr. Lassiter's quotes and comments, and my favorite one is that, you know, mine is like a parachute that only functions if it's open, right? And so you have to be open to some of these things. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a headlong rush into it, but sort of be open to it, because your breed's noted for other traits. We don't have to make Angus out of it. Okay? So this is something everybody's seen. This is just cattle facts in from USDA. The black line there is the current percent choice. I'm not trying to draw any inferences to it, but you know, if you were alive back in the 70s, we had that sort of percent choice. And we changed the grading, and we changed the type of cattle that we had coming in, and the percent choice dropped quite a bit. But I mean, that if you go back far enough, we had that kind of quality grade percentages in the cattle 50 years ago. We just made some changes in between, and now we're back up again. So everything's sort of directed by that. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. So why are they important? I'm talking to the audience here. I mean, I'm talking to the choir, excuse me. You know, that's sort of what, even with 72% choice, beef demand's up. Everybody will tell you that. Not just because of COVID. Even if you adjust it for the effects of COVID and people going to the grocery stores and buying more meat, beef demand's up. Part of that is because of domestic demand, and part of that is because of exports. Okay, but nonetheless, it's up, and it's not necessarily for the beef that doesn't grade, it's for the beef that does grade. So quality grade really predicts eating satisfaction. That's all that it does. It's not really a good indicator in my mind. So, you know, until you get to the really high grades, like prime. So a prime predicts eating satisfaction like 19 out of 20 times. It's an accurate predictor. Choice is an accurate predictor 9 out of 10 times. All right. Select 3 out of 4 times. And no rolls or standards only about 50% of the time. So it's predicting eating satisfaction. That's flavorfulness, it's tenderness, it's juiciness, those kinds of things. That's what it has to do. And so we're just saying fat is one of those things. Actually, fat as a predictor of all those things is only worth about 30% of it. But we seem to put a lot of emphasis on it, but that's the way that it is. Yield grade predicts leanness, and so there's 3 things that go into yield grade. Actually 4. One of them is really not important anymore. The one that's not important is kidney, pelvic, and heart fat. So that's the fat inside the carcass. Almost all the plants trim that out before it goes into the cooler. So if you're selling cattle on the rail, you know, that's your loss because they're dropping about 3.5% of that carcass weight on the floor before they weigh it to pay you. Okay. But so we don't use that much anymore. We use a standard of about 2.5%, and that's pretty close. Ribeye area, carcass weight, and fat thickness are the other 3 that are important. So carcass weight is important because just sheer size. So, but it's not the most important factor in determining yield grade. Okay? Believe it or not, fat thickness is. How much fat is over between the 12th and 13th rib? And I know I have a pointer, but I just sort of like to walk up to the screen. And we'll measure the fat thickness about 3/4 off the ribeye right there in inches. And it only takes 4/10 of an inch of fat, okay, about the width of your little finger, to change the yield grade to make it worse. Most cattle in a plant will do about 0.6, so they're already 1.5 yield grade worse than the yield grade you start with, which is a 2. So an animal with all other things being equal have 0.6 of an inch of fat. It's already a 3.5, and that's borderline for a lot of plants. So the yield grades go from 1, the very leanest, to 5, the very fattest. And in the last 15 or so years, they actually taken yield grade 3 in the plant, not by USDA, and split it into 3A and 3B. So a 3A is something that's just a 3, and a 3B is something that's almost a 4. And they actually price those differently at the major plants. Okay? And so fat thickness is the biggest factor. Ribeye area is important, and the reason why carcass weight is important is because a bigger animal, a heavier animal, has more muscle, but it also has more fat all over it, not just over the ribeye. Okay? And so we've looked at numerous beef quality audits, and it looks like the most recent one, which is nearly 10 years ago, before we had such wild choice select spreads. So the choice select spread, that's the average difference between a carcass that would grade choice and a carcass that would grade select that are of the same weight range. So back in the 90s, that was about $5 a hundredweight. Okay, right now it's averaging closer to about $15. And not too long ago, that difference for a very short period of time was almost $40 this year, this past spring. Which means that a choice carcass that weighed 800 pounds brought $320 more, all other things being considered equal, than a select carcass did. Okay? Because there was a demand for that. And so we already said what beef processors want. So that's just a picture. That's actually a Brahman steer, but you can't, I cut his hump off for you. Okay? And so what we do is we collect carcass data, and I'll tell you how we do this later on, but we'll have somebody at the plant, generally me, or one of my students, and we collect ear tag numbers, or however they're identified, right after they're knocked, right after they're rendered insensible and put on a hook, on a chain, and brought down the rail. And so that's a kill order. That's how we establish identity of the cattle. And that number stays with that animal through the entire process. And we generally put that number on a brisket, so if we have somebody standing at the table where evisceration occurs, we call that the gut table, but we'll call it the evisceration table. There's inspectors that are standing there. One of the inspectors looks at the rumen and the small intestine and the liver, and the other inspector across the table generally inspects the lungs and the heart. So the guy that does the liver works a little bit harder than the one that does the heart and the lungs, but they rotate around, so eventually he'll get an easier job. And that's where we'll tag the carcasses. We'll tag them on the brisket with that kill order. And then 48 hours later, we'll go into the retail cooler, and we'll tag those carcasses, so that's actually number 10. All right, and then we have a little card here that we'll actually collect the carcass data. And in this particular case, we're collecting tenderness data. So we're taking a steak, and it's actually a ribeye steak. It's supposed to be a loin steak. It's a loin steak. It's actually supposed to be a ribeye steak. So the hind quarters hanging up here, the forequarters down here. This is actually the ribeye, and up there's the loin. But it's close enough that it works pretty well. We buy that steak. It's about 12 ounces. We pay about $8 or $10 a pound for it. And Dr. Machado does the tenderness work for us on it. So that's just what you're looking at, so you see it. By the way, I'm leaving these slides. This PowerPoint will be used, so if anybody wants it, they're more than welcome to it. If it has anything. So what traits are important? We talked about carcass weight, ribeye, and fat thickness, and we talked about his carcass weight increase, yield grade increases. By increasing, I mean gets lower, closer to 5, because they have lower percent retail cuts. So y'all are using yearling weight, as I recall, for essentially an indicator trait for carcass weight in your $P index, and that's fine. Once again, it's a correlated character, it's not the character, right? So that's one of those things that's important. If you do that, you need to make sure you collect that carcass weight. I don't know that selection for carcass weight itself has any value. An EPD for carcass weight has any value. Its only value is to be used in an index to help you predict, more accurately predict yield rate. Okay? Ribeye area has value because you're able to predict muscling. But I think in terms of ribeye area, you need to adjust that for weight or age. And that's probably done internally by your EPD provider. Okay? Fat thickness. Now, fat thickness is one of those I think ultrasound, and I'm probably getting a little bit ahead of myself here. I think ultrasound does an excellent job of predicting ribeye area and fat thickness. In fact, it probably does a better job of predicting, I know it does a better job of predicting both of those of a standing animal. Think about that just a second. It's a live animal and it's standing. And so when we kill that animal, when that animal's killed and we pull the hide off, sometimes we pull the fat off. Not all the fat, but some of the fat. Some of that fat goes with the hide. Some of it's trimmed off by people that are trimming as they're pulling that hide down. And so as a result, sometimes our measurement of fat is probably not as accurate as an ultrasound. And then, of course, we can go back one, but y'all saw the carcass hanging down. We split that carcass. So the carcass, the faces of the eye and the loin are like this. And then we take a knife and we cut it. And then the bottom half of the carcass that has 52% of the weight hangs this way, right? So now we sort of elongate that ribeye just a little bit. Just a little. But so I've often wondered, I don't have any data to prove it, but I think we get a little bit different measurement between the ribeye face in the cooler, right, and the ribeye that you scan. Not enough to hurt you, but those are just things for us to understand as we're doing this, okay? And then down there, that's a USDA, kind of shows you what the different degrees of marbling score. Okay? All right. So let's talk a little bit about the genetics, and that's an old Ranch Squirrel picture. One of the things that we used to do with Ranch Squirrel and John McNeil and Bill Meese started that program is we took pictures of the calves, individual calves, when they came in. And then we took pictures of those steers when we weighed them before we shipped them. And I almost lost a good wildlife specialist doing that one day because he didn't realize that 1,200-pound Brayford steers didn't want his picture taken and he didn't get out of the way fast enough. And so that's actually a picture of that steer's ribeye who was eye select. And we actually had pictures so we could take the calf, we could take the live animal, we could take the ribeye area. And so you can kind of see what the development was. So you need to sort of know what's going on as you select for one trait, what are the effects on other traits, and that's sort of what I've got here. You know, the three traits that we talked about, marbling, ribeye, area, fat thickness, you know, they're the best predictors for either eating quality, for muscling, okay, or for cutability. All of them are moderately heritable, which is good. So heritability is a fraction of what you see that's due to genetics that you can select to improve. Okay, we call those additive genetics, or sometimes we call that breeding value. And our best estimate, as Dr. Herring told you yesterday, was the use of an EPD for that trait. That's still our best estimate of the transmitting ability of the animal. Fortunately, all these traits are pretty easy to change, and to give you an idea, if you like to select for weaning weight or yearling weight, okay, they have the same level of heritability, and so we generally see the same level of selection response. Okay, and I'll show you some charts here that both either Lance put together and or the association put together on your selection response to some traits in your EPDs and your carcass traits. But here's the thing about selection response. Okay, first off, you have to have some genetic variation. The more genetic variation you have in a trait, the more selection response that you're going to be able to get. All right, if you have very little genetic variation, okay, you're not going to get much selection response because all of your animals are going to be grouped around the average. Okay, and so if your numbers go from 1 to 2, 67% of your animals are going to be very close to 1.5, which is the average. Okay, statistically speaking, that's what happens. On the other hand, if your numbers go from 1 to 100, then 67% of your animals are gathered somewhere around 50, excuse me, and that could be anywhere from 25 to 75. So you have a lot more selection, a lot more ability to select. And then, of course, selection response is dependent on how accurate can you be. How well can you measure that trait? Okay? So if you have a scale, you can measure the trait pretty accurately. If you have an eyeball, you know, you can miss a chicken by 5 pounds nowadays. And so it's important to have the right tool to measure the trait accurately. All right? And nowadays, in terms of genomics, that doesn't just mean making sure that you measure 505 pounds. It also means that that animal has the parents you said it has, or that it has progeny that you said it has. Because you know what, we can find that out now. And we're finding some mistakes. Okay? It's always easy to pick up the wrong straw or forget that, oh yeah, I forgot to turn that cow in with that bull and that herd. And so it's important. So accuracy is not only about the record that you collected, but it's also about accuracy of making sure that the genetic relationship is accurate, because that's in your EPD. And then the other thing is, and this affects both males and females, is how intense can you be? Because remember, we're talking about that number scale from 1 to 100. If I'm selecting bulls, I can be pretty close to 100. But if I'm selecting females, there's not that many up there. I've got to slide back down, and I'll pick up a lot of females that are around 60 to 70. Yeah, I'll get a bunch of those that are 80 or 90 or maybe even close to 100. But in terms of the percent of total animals selected, most of my females are going to be around 60 to 70, because that's where most of them are. And so I'm not able to be nearly as intense, and that affects my selection accuracy. And that's the reason why in purebred circles, we've always focused on bull selection. But I'm going to tell you, we've got to pay attention to females. We have to pay attention to females. You start to look at those EPDs on those females that you're using. Because if you don't, you're leaving out half of your selection progress. If you treat them as if they are all zeros, okay, in terms of averages, they're average in terms of the EPD trait, okay, you're reducing your genetic progress. And in fact, if you're not looking at them, some of them could be even lower than the breed average, below 50%. All right, and then you're really making a tough road to hoe with that bull. Does that make sense? So if you're into that, think about that. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox and quit lecturing. So, how does it affect other traits? So, fat generally doesn't affect ribeye, but it greatly improves yield grade. That makes perfect sense. Although tenderness might be slightly reduced. I don't think y'all have a problem with fat. Most of the time, our European breeds, our British breeds like Hereford and Angus, and I'm only going to name those that are sort of the top 10. So if you're a shorthorn aficionado like Jason Clear is, you may be offended. But typically the English cattle, early maturing cattle, those are the ones that tend to get fat. They also tend to be the ones that have a little bit higher marbling, because puberty, early puberty, and high milk production tends to follow, okay, those things. Of course, y'all have some shorthorn genetics in the way back when, and the right kind, because they were milking shorthorn. All right, but I don't know how many of those are still around, but there's a potential for it anyway. Marbling, selection for reduced fat can reduce marbling. Ribeye area can improve. You can select for ribeye area and make it big, and I'll show you that you've done that. But you also select to increase weaning weight and yearling weight, because it's all weight, it's all muscle. There is little genetic relationship between reproductive traits and marbling, other than the fact that generally higher marbling breeds, okay, have earlier sexual maturity, excuse me. Yeah, selection for high cutability on the way high side can impact cavities And of course, extreme muscling can affect fertility, but that's not a problem for y'all. So ultrasound or scan or use carcass data, I think we have to use both. I mean, that's what I tell people. I like scan data, I like ultrasound data, but well, we have to check it. We have to make sure that it's measuring what we think it's going to measure. So I just over on the left-hand side is what I think, some thoughts about ultrasound data. You know, it's an accurate approximation of real carcass data. And I'm not sure Tommy would agree with me, or Dr. Perkins, but I think he would. It's an accurate approximation of carcass data. We can rank animals accurately on the basis of ultrasound. Do we accurately characterize them? Do they really weigh 505 pounds? Or are they heavier than an animal that is between 450 and 500 pounds? That's what I mean by ranking them accurately. It does an excellent job of measuring ribeye area and fat thickness. I've already said that. Intramuscular fat predictions. Remember, those are percents, right? They're not really muscle scores. Well, maybe they are in the EPDs. But in terms of ultrasound, we're measuring the amount of fat, percent fat. And I'm not going to go through all the rigmarole because I didn't help develop them, but somewhere around 4% is considered to be enough intramuscular fat to be low choice. Now, if you're scanning bulls at the appropriate age, you can actually add about 1% to that, adjust it, because remember, bull has what? Testosterone, right? And so that impacts intramuscular fat deposition, pushes it down. And so what we see is, and some people even say 1.25, but I think for the age of the bulls that y'all are scanning in your breed, probably 1%. So if I scanned a Beefmaster bull that was a yearling or 14-month-old or 16-month-old bull, and he scanned at 3.0, I would feel comfortable in adjusting him to a 4.0, which would make him right at the beginning of low choice, that's small. Okay, I'm not worried about him. It's the ones that are twos to begin with that I worry about because they're select. I'm not going to be able to make much change with them. Scan the cattle that carcass data will be collected. I think this is important. We're doing this in the Brahman Association. We've relied on scan data for a long time. We had a set of cattle a couple of years ago, 150 steers that were supposed to be 40% choice. Now I'm going to tell you, I've seen some Brahman cattle that will grade 50, 60% choice. But they're out breeders that are real conscientious and are working really hard. Okay? And I was really surprised when I saw these cattle with 40%, that's pretty darn good, from a mixed group. Okay, it turned out that they graded 12%. I had egg on my face with SBA. They were a little unhappy, but it was okay. They understood the nature of the problem. And so now we're scanning those cattle and we're running about 10 or 12%, and that's what we're running, is about 10 or 12%. Perkins got together and we started working on getting this problem fixed. So we have what I like about ultrasound is it's inexpensive and it's very, very useful. We can use it to sort cattle pretty well. I think we can use it to select cattle at the herd level. Okay? At the herd level for sure. Carcass data is a real thing. We talked about ribeye area measurement, fat thickness. Talked about fat thickness is generally a little bit less because some fat's removed in hide removal. Marbling scores are more accurate because we're actually measuring marbling score. Now, the nice thing about it is that the real thing I'm worried about on carcass information is a marbling score, but we'll collect fat and ribeye area and carcass weight. And so that improves our, any sort of a carcass EPD or a carcass index, a dollar index, what y'all call like dollar teeth. I'm more accurately measuring the characters, and so I'll have a more accurate index defined as a result. All right, but now there's some other things that you can see that when you have somebody in there, they can tell you, well, how close was it? Was it just a choice? Or was it like a slight 90, which means it's a very high select, almost choice? Does that make sense? 10 points of a marbling score away from being choice. I'd be happy with that. Then you can see some other things, like maybe there's some things that cause that choice ribeye to not grade choice. So blood splash, so taking too long between knocking the cattle and X-ray when they're bleeding. So blood pressure rises, capillaries in ribeye area explode, and then when you cut that ribeye face, it's sort of bloody. Okay, there's blood's all over here, and basically that will reduce your grade, because nobody wants to buy that at a grocery store. So you may wind up eating it at Ruth Chris, but you're not going to eat it at a grocery store, because you won't see it until it's cooked. Or maybe a callus. Okay, so it could be that the ribeye was damaged and you got a big glob of fat in there. Or maybe it was a dark cutter. Animal was stressed a little bit. Long-term stress, not short-term stress. And so what happens is that the ribeye doesn't oxygenate. It's not pretty and pink. It's sort of dark like your shirt back there in the corner, right? Or maybe there's a maturity issue. We doing okay on time, Colin? Just tell me when to shut up and I'll stop. Okay? So those are some things, some additional things that you can get from this type of carcass information.
What size ribeye?
What size ribeye, okay? Tell me how big the animal is.
Well, I mean,
Oh, I understand. Yeah. So typically, they don't really look at ribeyes. There's no discrimination for really big ribeyes or really small ones, other than how they affect yield grade. But for most of the time, we're talking about 11 to about 15 inches. Now, I've seen some bigger ones, right? I've seen some smaller ones. But the other thing that's really important is sort of that relative size as it affects yield grade. Okay, so the yield grade equation was designed for an 11 square inch ribeye. So that's average, no adjustment. It takes 3 square inches of ribeye to change the yield grade. If you add 3, so if you go from 11 to a 14, all other things being considered, you move a 2 to a 1. Okay, if you have an 11 square inch ribeye and you measure it and it's only 8 inches, it goes from a 2 to a 3. It only takes 4/10 of an inch of fat. It takes 300 pounds of carcass, 150 pounds of carcass weight to do that, by the way. And so most of our carcasses right now are somewhere, I would say, between 700 and 900 pounds. So there's about a two yield grade variance. Most carcasses right now are running about 800 pounds. For a while there, we were touching 900 pounds. So here's how it does. This is just sort of my thoughts. You know, I would like to see us, and I tried to do ranch corral this way, but it never got off the ground. I'd like to see sort of sire groups being fed. For y'all, it would be most important. Have groups of 5, and the reason why 5 progeny would be good. 5 progeny would be good because that would be sort of the minimum number to get your accuracy of your EPD up around 60%. Does that sound about right, Colin? Okay. And then next year you could send 5 more and you'd be up now around 70 to 80%. Now your EPD might not be any good, so you may not want to do that, but I'm just saying. After that first year, you have a pretty good idea of where you're at. So I would think about 5 progeny, DNA parent verified, and then you could also use markers, right? For additional information in terms of linking that animal with other animals in the breed, as well as parent identification. Then if your research decides that they want to do some DNA testing on genetic markers, you've already got those data. Not that you have to do it with this project. Steers should represent the average of your herd. People always ask me, I said, well, I picked one of my best ones and 3 of my middle ones and 1 of my worst ones. That's pretty average. Or just pick 5 right out of the middle. Don't send me your worst. Don't send the worst ones and don't send the best ones. Steers need to be backgrounded. Anytime you send cattle to a feed yard, you ought to background them. Straighten them out, teach them how to eat, drink out of a bunk, give them some basic shots. Because I can tell you right now, medicine costs, if they have to take an animal to, and from all experience, and some of y'all know this too, one treatment's about 75 to 100 bucks. Antibiotics are not cheap. Vaccines are. And of course, you lose performance on those cattle. Typically, if an animal goes through one hospital treatment and he was going to be low choice, he has now become high select. And that's the kind of data that you don't need. And in fact, I'm not even sure we would keep that kind of information. We might have a different way to measure, look at that. Association. You get a phone call. By the way, we treated your steer, he's really sick. You can either come get him, or we're going to realize him, we're going to send him to the livestock barn, and he's going to get, we're going to take him out of the program. Don't wait till the medicine bill gets to be $300 or $400. Just something on the side. Depending on numbers, probably the steers are going to be commingled and fed by weight breaks. We used to feed them by about 75-pound weight breaks, and by the time that we were done killing them, in a group of steers that originally came on feed weighing 75 pounds from the heaviest to the lightest, they might weigh 150 pounds. That's the way it is. Preliminary weights and measures can be done on arrival. You can scan those cattle if you want to do a little research project. That's not going to hurt them. Scan and weigh steers about 2/3 of the way through the feeding program, and that's going to be your baseline scan that you'll compare your carcass data to. Might be a little bit later if you want, but be careful because they're fat steers and they break legs and they break noses, so watch out for that. Range for carcass data to be collected. If you feed in Texas, the two people that are doing it is in the northern part of the state, West Texas A&M. They have a carcass data service, and then of course you can contact us. I put Texas A&M University Kingsville there for Tanner because I'm sort of backing out of the deal, right? I'm 67 years old. I'm going to do something different one of these days, no time soon. But I want Tanner to be involved. We talked about how the cattle are tagged and data collected. We enter that information in a spreadsheet, send it to the association, and then it gets incorporated in herd report. And the beauty of this thing is that you can make this a breed association event. So the cattle come in, and then, maybe halfway through you have a little field day at the feed yard. Bring the feeders in, bring other people in, talk about what your cattle are doing, showcase them. Show what fed beef masters look like. And then when you have all this data, maybe you take pictures of them coming in, you take pictures of them going out, you take pictures of ribeye, we can arrange for that. Then you can talk about that program and you can promote that program. You can use it for advertising, you can use it for genetics, you can use it for everything. Okay? So there's just a lot of different things that you can do.
Joe, if we could swing it, that's a calf-fed program, it'd be better to feed yearlings if you could, right?
Yeah, it'd be better to feed yearlings if you could, okay? Because right now cost of gain is about $1 a pound. It's going to vary depending on who you go with. So if you just want to know how it works, it's going to cost you about $1 a pound. That's everything. Feed cost, total cost of gain may be another nickel, maybe a dime over that. That includes medication, transportation, and things like that. So if you've got yearlings and they weigh 700 pounds, you're trying to get them to, say, 1,250 or 1,300 pounds, it's going to be a couple $100 cheaper to do that than if they come in at 450 or 5.
They would grade better too, right?
They'll probably grade better, although the calf feds seem to grade pretty well. But for y'all, maybe a yearling program would work. And you can use, and I said progeny, but you can use half sibs, okay? But the problem with half sibs is, remember that they're more distantly genetically related, right? And they're only, on average, they have only about 25% of their genes are the same, half sibs. And so as a result, you don't get as much selection response, and you have to sort of, I don't want to use the word discount, but the effectiveness of that data is reduced compared to progeny by about 50%, simply because of genetic relationship. And that's where DNA is going to be really important if you decide to use half sibs, or if you use progeny of another breed. Okay, so if you decide to put beef master bulls on some other breed cow, nothing wrong with that, as long as they're sort of average. Okay, remember that they're going to be half-bloods, they're going to be F1s, they're not going to be purebreds. Okay, so I just actually pulled this off your chart, and off your website. I'll try to use the red line here. So here's marbling. All right, so here's your top 1%, and that's an average. That's not your top bull is not 0.38. Your top bull, I'll show them to you here in a minute, is double that, almost double that in terms of IMF or marbling. And so that's an average of all the bulls, 1% or better, I guess. This is an average of all the bulls that are in the bottom 5%, the bottom 1/20th, okay, is right here, minus 0.24. So just looking at those two averages between here and here, okay, if you add those two together, you're talking about, 0.6 of a fat thickness, or, excuse me, 0.6 of a marbling score, 0.6%. Okay? Now, that's just looking at this. So you have some variation there. If we want to look at what else in terms of trait, here's fat. Negative number is good for fat because that means we're going to reduce it a little bit. So it's pretty much all negative. You go from here to here, about 0.06, almost 0.07. Okay? And then ribeye area, this is square inches. Okay, so 0.99, so your best 1% bulls will add almost 1 square inch to their progeny compared to the average. Your worst bulls will deduct about half a square inch. So you have about 1.5 square inches between these two down this ramp. And then y'all are using yearling weight, as I recall, for an indicator's rate for yearling, for carcass weight. So it goes from, and this is not your best bull, that's the average of the best 1%, 85 down to 19. And so we're looking at about a range of, 64 or thereabouts, 66 in terms of yearling weight, and I screwed that up on the average. I'm going to show you this. But I want to look at something else over here. I'm sort of a fan of indexes. All right, I can select for marbling score, I can select for yearling weight, fat thickness, and for ribeye area, but I'm not going to find the bull that is in the top 1% maybe for all these. Now, I might find a bull that's in the top 1% here, and maybe over here, he might be down here, and then I have another one for ribeye area, and he might be here, and the guy for yearling weight, he might be here. So they're all going to be sort of scattered above this 20% line. And so, and I'm really, basically selecting for extremes. They have to be the best in each one of those 4 traits. Yet, some of those are correlated, ribeye area and carcass weight, but ribeye area and yearling weight are correlated. Fat thickness and marbling have a weak association. And so that's why I like this idea of having, and I'm going to talk about $T, $M, and $FE are fine, but they're not for carcass traits. But look at the range and variation here. Your top 1% is 150, your bottom 5% is 34, so you do that little subtraction. And that's not your best bull. That's the average of the top 1%. You do that little subtraction there, you have about 125 pounds, $125, of additional value from the top to the bottom. So you've got some pretty good variation there. And I'm pretty sure I screwed this up, so don't worry too much. I actually used I think on this, I pulled this information right off of here, so it's going to be a little bit different. This actually, I think I stole this from Lance's presentation at Mr. Carr's Field Day. And so here's marbling. So you have 3,837 records at that time. Here's the average marbling for the breed. That's not good, folks. That's 0. Okay? We need to work on that. Of course, that's scan data, I understand. It's not as bad as a minimum, minus 0.6, but the maximum is pretty good, 0.726. All right. What this standard deviation is, that is a measurement of, if we took this mean right here, 0.02, and added or subtracted 0.147 from that, that would represent where 67% of your animals lie. 67% of your animals are between a plus 0.147 for marbling score or minus 0.147 for marbling score. That's what that means. Okay. Go over here and look at $T. So the average for $T is $70, almost $71. Okay? The majority of your bulls, and probably females as well, active sires, plus or minus 26. So almost $100 down to, $44? Pretty good range. $44 is what we're leaving on the table according to the National Beef Quality Audit. So you've got some variation, you've got some things to select for. Possibilities, so I pulled this off your data set, off your website. So the top ranking Beefmaster bull is a .726. I just wrote it in. I would have said it 0.73, but in case you're looking for him, that's the real number. Almost 3/4 of an IMF percentage more than the breed average. Think about that. Almost, we could call it 1%, but it's 3/4 of 1%. Problem is, it's only one bull. But there's others out there, we just haven't found them. Okay? Selecting bulls out of the top 5% is probably what we're going to do. That's typically about 2 standard deviations, so we'll have to, instead of ±1, it's ±2. All right, 5% would select bulls with an average EPD of 0.24. Not bad, that's half. That's a quarter of a score. But if you're selecting for that, we've already said that, what happens to other traits? So let's look at dollar T, and I'm not sure what all goes into dollar T, what the weight rankings are. I understand that y'all may be changing them, and that's fine, but I don't know, I'm just saying here. The top ranking bull for dollar T has an index value of 195. 3 times the breed average. Okay? And it's pretty accurate. I think it's about 0.6 or 0.67, something along that line. Okay? The top 1%, the average is only 150. This guy's another $45 over that. But even at the top 1%, it's twice the breed average. So there's some opportunities there to make some change. Okay? This is off your webpage, so I felt comfortable using it. I'm not promoting anybody's bulls. This is trait leaders for IMF, and I'm gonna have to get up here because I'll have to be able to read it. Okay, I have glasses on, but still, it's about as big as I can get. So it's right here. IMF EPD is 0.73. The accuracy was 0.73. The accuracy is 0.73 or 73% on 29 records. How much did that cost? Okay. Dollar T value, remember there's no accuracies with the dollar with the dollar index value. $94. So he's not even the highest bull. Because remember it's balanced for ribeye area, fat thickness, and way back over here for yearling one. So we're not going to make progress a lot of progress in marbling score, but we're going to bring all those other traits up with us when we do that. By the way, this happens to be the trait leader for dollar T, and the index value was 193. Now, in both of these, what I liked about them, in fact, when I was looking at all your index, your trait leaders, not just your index through your EPDs, anywhere from 1/3 to 1/2 of the bulls, okay, are with one generation, born since 2017. That's good. Because if you want to make genetic progress, you've got to have young bulls identified to use. And so that's very, very important to try to get as many of those young bulls tested and get them listed so you know what's going on. This is actually from Lance. I stole it from you, Lance. And so this is, you can tell me this is actually the bull carcass trends. These are actual measurements. Lance, you in it? Yes, not. Colin, can you tell me?
Say that one
Or
more
those actual ribeye, those are actual ultrasound measurements, right? The averages of those. So, you know what, y'all making some progress. This is on the bulls. Okay, this is ribeye area. And not so much in IMF. And I'm not worried about fat, right? Bless you. Here's the heifers, same kind of deal. Heifers are always going to score a little bit higher in IMF than bulls will, right? Because of testosterone. Let's look at your genetic trends. So this is your EPDs for carcass weight right off your website. Ribeye area, pretty easy to select for. Just like select for weaning weight or yearling weight. And I'm assuming that you're probably selecting for some other traits. And part of that might be because of what's going on with dollar T. Okay, but nonetheless, you are improving, particularly in the last generation. So when I'm talking about a generation interval in cattle, that's about 4 to 5 years. Cattle that are born today, how old will they be when they produce cattle that will replace them as parents? About 4 years. And so look at your trend right here. It's very positive. Okay, IMF is right here, or marbling, right here, sort of bound. You made some improvement, not much. Fat's pretty low. Don't worry about fat. Okay, don't worry about fat. We're going to trim it off if it gets to be too much. Here's your indexes. All right, here's dollar T. All right, you can see that you haven't made much improvement, but it really follows what's going on with ribeye area, I think. All right, here is, here's the feed efficiency and maternal ability, but this is what I wanted to impart to you. So this is what Lance was talking about in Mr. Carr's field day the other day. I think this is laudable. This is great. It's not enough, but it's a good start, okay? I don't own any of your cattle. I use your cattle as crossbreds, but I don't own any. Well, I do actually have a Beefmaster bull. Okay? So goal number one, increase the number of cattle scanned to 50% of those registered. I think that's great. It's approximately 1/3 of that right now, but over the next 5 years, I think you can do that. Improve IMF by 25% in the next 5 years. All right, I think you can probably do that, because remember what your herd average is? What was it? 0. We can do better than that, right? And talks about what we're going to do with bulls and heifers. I think that's important. And improve RE. I think you can sure enough do that. You're already doing that. So my last slide is, and I'll shut up. I'm a little bit over. So, I think you ought to consider it. It's not going to be for everybody. If I'm raising replacement heifers and I've got a good market for it, I'm probably not going to be very interested in doing this. On the other hand, if I'm going to sell some bulls to some commercial guys and they're feeding their calves, I want to at least show them that my cattle will do no harm. Will actually improve their cattle or complement their cattle. I think there's use for that kind of stuff. And so that's why I put that in there. I would like to see more, and I actually put that in there before I saw Lance's slide, what the Breed Improvement Committee wanted to do. So we're on the same level. Increased collection of ultrasound data on parents and progeny. I think I would like to see, okay, the collection of some real carcass data with ultrasound scan data. I think you need to do carcass data to collect good carcass data, but while you're doing it, scan them as well. Make sure that you're actually measuring with the ultrasound machine what you're measuring in the cooler. Collect some DNA. Some of that data can be full bloods. Most can be half bloods. However, without that carcass data, right now your selection for dollar T and whatever adjustments you're going to make into it, my suggestion, if you're interested in carcass merit, you weight marbling score a little bit more heavily than whatever it is being measured out. And maybe not fat thickness as much, and maybe not yearling weight as much. Because you already got ribeye area. You already have a measure of weight. So if you have a positive effect, if you have a positive value for yearling weight and a positive value for ribeye area, those are two positive values for increased muscle or growth or weight, right? Does that make sense? You only need one of them. You might want to have one that sort of holds yearling weight at some level, doesn't let it get too big, and then emphasize more on ribeye area and fat, and intramuscular fat. That would be my opinion. But it's y'all's opinion. Okay, I'm going to shut up. Anybody has any questions? I'll be glad to try to answer them. I apologize I took too long, but what the heck? Yes, sir, Mr. Carter.
BBU and most breed associations have a pretty long period of time permissible to officially adjust for IMF EPD. I'm wondering, and have wondered for some time, with that lengthy period, how much difference there would be in an IMF EPD if done on yearlings that are right off the grass as compared to those same cattle done close to the end of that permissible period that had been fed considerably after coming off grass. And if that is a significant difference, why shouldn't we have some kind of a body score adjustment in that IMF figure more meaningful.
Okay, so the question is, if you measure of age or thereabouts off of grass, as opposed to maybe 6 months later off of feed, how are they gonna rank? Are they gonna be similar? They're probably gonna rank pretty closely the same. The actual scan number will be different. But the top ones will generally, in both, will generally be the top ones. You're not gonna see a change in rank. But what we really need, I think, and so if I understand your question, if that's the case, if we get some accurate correspondence between that, how can we take those young cattle, what's the adjustment to make them look like what they're gonna look like when they're fed cattle? Is that correct?
Well, I'm just, my concern is you're gonna wind up comparing IMF EPDs from cattle at one ranch or part of the country and another one. And those that you're comparing might have been done right off grass
Sure.
at the end of a feed period.
Yes.
I think I realize that those that are going to be in the upper end of the scoring off the grass will likewise be toward the upper ends after being fed for a while. But it's that long time period comparing those that just off the grass with something in that permissible period at the later end of it that have had feed.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and what we want to be able to do is be able to look at those young cattle and predict what they're going to be like as older cattle. Not just the ranking, but the number, what the number could be. And I think that with having some of this serial scan data where you have your young cattle and then those same cattle go on feed, as long as they're always treated the same, except for the feeding program, I think you can make those adjustments.
And in view of some of the other things you said about the benefits of actual carcass evaluation as distinguished from sonogram, is there any hope of reinstating a ranch to rail program?
Probably not. To be honest with you, there's a number, the only one that has been sort of patterned after that and is continuing to run has been the Brahman Association. And it's not really like the ranch to rail program like you and I remember, but it is basically just a steer feed out program that feeds out purebred steers, that information goes back to their EPD calculations. But that's the only, but there's a lot of feed yards. I mean, and I'm talking about Texas, and I realize that maybe not as many feed yards in other states, but if you do this, you don't have to. To me, it's, once we can genetically link these groups of steers, okay, through, I won't even call them reference sires or widely used beefmaster sires or whatever, and you can feed anywhere, okay, because we can sort out those environmental effects. Once we have that genetic link, that genetic relationship between the sires that you're interested in and the widely used sires, their progeny, their offspring being fed in this yard, we can compare them to another set of animals in a different feed yard that have progeny by that same widely used sire. But I agree with you, Mr. Carter, going back to that other point, we need to figure out some way to be able to adjust young cattle, okay, instead of waiting 6 months to see what they look like. But there's another question. Yes.
Oh.
Unless I misunderstood, the dollar T index is based just on the carcass data. I've been under the impression, I know that was a major part of it, but I've been under the impression that there are other factors that goes into coming up with the dollar T, like weights at different ages and so forth.
Yearling weight, as I understand it, Colin can tell me, yearling weight, ultrasound scan data for fat thickness, ribeye area, and IMF or marbling sore. Is that the only four? Those are the four things that go into dollar T. Dollar M is different. It has a lot more factors in it, and I don't know what they
So
are.
what are the four things in dollar T?
A yearling weight, okay, is a correlated character for carcass weight. Okay, ultrasound fat thickness, ultrasound ribeye area, and ultrasound marbling score or intramuscular factor.
So yearling weight's
Yeah.
about the only
Yeah,
other
yearling
factor.
weight is closely associated with carcass weight. It's not perfect, but it's very closely associated, probably about 60%.
Thank you.
There's another question, yes?
Dr. Paschal, in the beginning of your presentation,
Uh-huh.
you mentioned something about y'all have found some discrepancies between
Uh-huh.
actual scan data and carcass
In Brahma?
in the Bronx.
Yes.
Would you expand on that very quickly? Because
Yeah.
I think a lot of us, that drew up a little flag because a
Yeah,
lot of us that scan are hanging our hats on that.
I understand, and I hang my hat on it too, okay? I like ultrasound information. I think it's very, very important, and I still encourage everybody to use it. But we just have to be careful that we need to have some baseline, and in particular in the Brahman deal, what the flag was, is that we scanned these cattle after about 100 days on feed, and they said there was going to be 40% choice. I wasn't worried about the actual choice, but I was sort of worried about where the ranking was, and then it turned out that we were about 12%. So three things, Perkins got involved, Tommy Perkins got involved, and we really sorted it out. Joe Mass, the Executive Vice President, ADBA, and we got with STX because they're using camera data, so they didn't have to just rely on my marbling score. And essentially what was happening is that we had an old machine, okay, a poor interpretation of the program that was being used, even by the cup lab, okay, and the technique, okay? So the machine was involved, the program was involved, and of course the scanner, the technician was involved. Got all that straightened out. And so the data set that this year is right on target, unfortunately, but it's right on target.
Are they
So-
12?
Huh?
Are they 12 or 40?
They were 12. They were 12. But, so don't worry, I mean, your information is going to a cup lab. The Brahman deal is, it's different. I mean, y'all know Brahman cattle look like. It's a little bit different, and those cattle are much harder to scan than y'all's cattle are, just because of the disposition. I probably said that on camera, didn't I? Yes, sir.
A little over 20 years ago, we were beginning investigating the Northern Line program, and we had meat animal scientists come and talk.
Right, the real ones.
Gary Smith.
Yeah, real ones, yeah, absolutely. I remember those days.
And they told us that, this is over 20 years ago, they told us that marbling had less than a 5% effect on tenderness.
Really?
Has something
Okay.
changed?
No, it really, I
I'm
just
not talking about flavor, just,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
talking about tenderness.
yeah, in terms of genetic effect on tenderness, it's really close to 30%.
30%
Yeah,
now?
yeah. At the high level. You know, obviously, it doesn't have much effect if you're talking about a standard or a low select, but we're talking about choice and prime. It has a much higher effect. Okay, good point. I'll be around, I promise